Sound speeds, and welcome back to Speed Bumps. This is episode 10. If you've been watching from the very beginning, thank you. Make sure you tell me in the comments below if you are enjoying this or not, because I've only committed to 10 episodes so far and don't know if I'm going to continue after this one. And it's going to completely depend on the feedback that I get and whether or not it's being viewed and what people think of it as a general rule. Now, if you're not familiar with Speed Bumps, there are 9 other episodes. But let me not get ahead of myself here. This is a podcast that takes place during my drive home from set. Right now I'm in rush hour traffic, and that's not fun. However, I will be answering a viewer question. So if you have a question, be sure to ask it in the comments below. And I'm going to also talk about something sound from a pro sound perspective. Could be related to production audio, could be something to do with podcasting or something like that, but it is definitely sound related. And I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get into our question. I don't understand phasing in microphones. I thought that you should want to have a mic for everyone, no matter how close they are. Is it because of delay or not? What do I need to know? So what is phasing, and is it a big deal? Well, if you're talking about a single microphone and only a single microphone is open at a given time, then there's no concern there. You have bigger fish to fry, like, for example, acoustics. If the acoustics are bad in the room, you have echo and reverb, then you could have some of the same principles I'm going to talk about later apply. But you asked specifically about phasing, which is basically, in a nutshell, if you have 2 or more microphones picking up the same sound source. For example, let's say I have one microphone that's 1 foot away from my mouth and another microphone that's 3 feet away from my mouth, and they're both pointed directly at me. The acoustic vibrations of me speaking in the air are going to go into both microphones at different timing. And because the vibrations, especially the lower frequencies, are going to fall off a little bit over distance, the second microphone will pick up less of those than it will be the mids and highs. And because of the timing of all the waves going in at different timing intervals, the waves that go up and down might not align perfectly. Now, they might, in which case it will pick up a louder signal from both microphones at the same time. And if you blend them together, it's going to pick up both of them at the same exact time and increase the volume. But if they happen to be doing this number, then that's actually going to be reducing and perhaps even canceling out those frequencies. And keeping in mind that you have a huge range of frequencies, and every single one of them is a different width. For example, in a human hearing frequency range, we normally talk about 20 to 20,000 hertz. A 20 hertz wave is 17.15 meters long, about 56 feet. If you were talking about a wave that is 20,000 hertz, that is that's a 1,000 times higher frequency, or it's 1,000 times in number, so it's 20 up to 20,000, but it's also, the sine wave itself is 1/1000th in length, so it's only 17.15 millimeters in length. So 17.15 meters to 17.15 millimeters. The reason this comes into play is because every single wave that is in between has a different crest and trough width. The wavelength itself from one to the next is a certain width. And that's the width that I was just talking about regarding bandwidth. And if you were to count the number of cycles, because that's basically what hertz are, is cycles per second, 20 hertz would travel in 1 second across a given time. Versus 20,000 hertz signals would have 20,000 waves passing a space at a given time. Which of course means that if sound travels at 343 meters per second, you divide that by 20, and that's the length of one sine wave. Hence how we came up with that measurement number. And the same thing can apply to any hertz frequency. You simply take the number of the hertz cycle and you divide that by the number of meters, and that's how you get it. So 343 meters per second and a 343 hertz sine wave would be the same length. So that's when a sine wave that is 1 meter in length is going to be basically not 1 meter. That would be 343 meters. Yes, I said it right. So 343 meters would be 343 cycles per second if it's 1 meter long. That's how you come up with that. So in a general rule, that will give you the information you need if that's what you were curious about and how to measure them. But keeping in mind that there's a lot of frequencies, and they're going to be going through crests and troughs at different timing. And that's going to pull and start creating weird effects when you blend the two of them together because they're not timed identically. So when you play two microphones that are even to each other in volume, and they're picking up the same sound source, you want them to be at least 3 times the distance from each other. So 3 times from the mouth or sound source. So if it's 1 foot away on one microphone, you want it to be at least 3 feet away on the other one. If it's 6 inches away from me over here, then you want to have the other one 18 inches away on the other side. Now, there is software you can use to fix that. Like, for example, dialogue isolation and isotope. You don't want to have to rely on software to do anything. You want to fix all sound-related issues in pre or in the actual production, so that way post has as little to do as possible. You want it to be quiet so you don't have to process that out. You don't want to have acoustic vibrations that are bouncing off of surfaces, which is like echo and reverb, which is kind of what I was talking about before, the same kind of thing as phasing, because it definitely does. The microphone, a single microphone would pick up those vibrations off of a wall if it's a very roomy and there's a lot of echoes and reverb in the room. That's how it comes into play. But as a general rule, that's how phasing works. If you have microphones too close, now you can cue them out and play the patterns against each other and try to reduce your decibel level that way too. And that does work and help somewhat. But you don't want to rely on that kind of thing if you have other alternatives, like separating people a little bit. If you're doing a podcast and it's not on video, separate yourselves a little bit more. You're already on headphones with each other and you can hear each other fine. If you're doing a podcast, don't be that's on video, don't be afraid about separating yourselves just a little bit, cueing the microphones hard off of each other depending on the pattern, cardioid, supercardioid, whatever, and playing those patterns against the acoustics and try to pick the best angle for your voice, for the acoustics in the room, and to try to not pick up the other person that you're doing the podcast or recording with. The next thing I want to talk about is the on-set photographer. A lot of people this day and age don't know that in the older era of film, if something were to happen to the director of photography, the on-set photographer would step up and be the DP. The reason why is because they had a camera in their hands that they needed to properly expose film for as well. So they would be able to properly set those settings. The camera operators would still manage the shot. The gaffer would still be in charge of the lighting, but the on-set photographer would basically be the role of the DP. Now, in the digital era, that kind of has gone out the window. The gaffer still manages the lights, or now as they're referred to, chief lighting technicians, CLTs, and the camera operators still frame things up correctly, but now it most likely would be the DIT because they already know the look of the show and how it's being processed and that kind of thing. So that's more along the lines of what it would be this day and age. However, the on-set photographer no longer really has any kind of a pull with regards to where they stand on set. Usually, once camera and lighting and everybody is where they're going to be, the boom operator has to be there because we're acquiring the sound for the show, but then after them is the stills person who can always request a pass for just them. Now, their goal is to try to get something interesting, but the shots are only lit for the angles of the camera that's going to be making the movie or TV show. So they're a little bit off of the actual down the barrel where it's properly lit. You know, they're going to be try to be near camera as much as they can, but they're not going to be able to get it exactly the right positioning all the time. I mean, sometimes it'll look pretty decent because they're lighting from multiple cameras, but as a general rule, the on-set photographer has a big challenge to deal with. And so what I usually try to do as a boom operator is work with them. Let them know that wherever they want to be is probably okay, because as a general rule, boom operators can be in multiple places and still accomplish our job very effectively. Not like an on-set photographer that only has maybe 1 or 2 angles that they can possibly compose a shot from and still have it be interesting enough to be used for the promotion of the show. So what I will usually do is tell the on-set photographer when they say, where are you going to be? I'll say, where do you want to be? And then based on what they say, I will go wherever I can, nearby usually, and do what I need to do. Now, the reason I usually allow them to be wherever they want to be is because it allows me to manage them. And so I think that managing the on-set photographer is something that we should do as boom operators. If I don't manage them and they're just going to try to be fighting for a shot wherever it is because I'm like, look, I need to have this space, then what they're going to do is try to jump out real quickly, take a picture, jump out behind me, take a picture. Step in front of exactly where I'm trying to move, take a picture. It's going to drive me crazy, potentially causing me to impact them, hit them, not be able to go where I need to go, and I don't want that to happen. Since I started managing the on-set photographer, I have found that I've had 0 issues. Now, what does it mean to manage the on-set photographer? Here's a boom operator trick for you. If I were to tell them be wherever you want to be. Where do you want to be? And they say, well, right where you are. I'm like, okay, I'll take a step to the side. I'll say, do me a favor though, don't move. If I know where you are, please don't move unless they leave. I mean, then it's totally fine. But usually what will happen is I'll even invite them to stand in front of me if they want to, because I will be over one of their shoulders. And I tell you, my rule is be wherever you want to be. Just let me know where that's going to be and don't move. Don't just rock all over the places you're trying to get your shot. Don't do that. You're going to drive me crazy. And then I could potentially hit you or, something like that if I'm holding the boom a certain way and trying to cue. If you stay still, I know you're there. I know how to work around you. I already do it for camera and dolly and lights and everything else. I can manage you too. It's no big deal. I'm going to be their savior, their main person that they're going to love to see on a show. And it's simply by allowing them to be yet another person that I work around, with few exceptions. Sometimes there's only one place I can be. And in that circumstance, I say, look, I got to be right here, dude. I would only tell you this if it was true and I had to be there. But, I need you to be someplace else this time. But that is very, very seldom. It's usually on a very small set someplace, or at some place where there's just too much going on and like there's action sequences, people running, going, crossing foreground, and I just can't have anyone in front of me because there could be a potential risk of anything if I'm doing like a walk and talk, or I'm trying to move this way and that way. I want to have things as clear as possible. I'm going to be working on those moves. So usually I'll just tell the on-set photographer where I'm going to be, and they'll work around me in those circumstances. But those are very few and far between. Most of the time, if it's a stationary set, I'll tell them, where do you want to be? And then I'll work around them. They're going to love you for it, and they're going to do exactly as you ask and not move around. If they break that rule, I'll revoke that privilege, and I'll suddenly say, no, dude, I got to be here. Sorry. But I'll tell you this. They are so used to being bullied to a certain degree by boom operators. If you tell them where, that you'll work around them, provided that they follow a couple of simple rules, they will follow them. You'll be very pleased. So there you have it, episode 10 of the Speed Bumps podcast. If you've been enjoying this, write down in the comments below so that way I know, and maybe I'll continue. Who knows? I don't know yet what I'm going to do. And in all fairness, I shot all of these episodes in July of 2020 over a 2-week period. Every single day as I was driving home from set, I recorded an episode. So if you look at my COVID badge, sometimes it will say, like this says Friday, yesterday's would say Thursday, day before Wednesday. And the previous episode, Tuesday, and then Monday, and it's been going back. So I say the previous day's episode is actually the previous week's episode, but it's been over the course of a 2-week period. Now, what have I been using for post? Because you might notice it's a little bit different than normal. Well, I've been using DaVinci Resolve because it does a much better job of tracking things to be able to blur windows and stuff than does Cyberlink's Power Director. Power Director is god-awful at tracking things. It's terrible. So I've been using, for the podcast here, DaVinci Resolve. Let me know what you think about that. It may be distracting seeing things blurred out, but hey, I don't want you guys knowing all the details about where I'm going and what I'm doing and where I live and that kind of thing. I'll blur it all out. So that way I at least have a little bit of protection, even though it could be argued that people can be found in 2022 as of the time of this recording. But you know what? I'm not going to make it easy if I can help it. Anyway, thanks for tuning into this episode of Speed Bumps. Be sure to write in the comments below if you've been enjoying this content. And be sure to perhaps stay tuned, because I may do this again in the future if I get more positive feedback with more questions that have been written in comments or sent to me via email. As always, more pro sound tips, which I promise I can talk. And as always, sound advice.
If you'd like to ask a sound-related question for a future episode, send a written, audio, or video question to ssp@soundspeeds.us. That's soundspeeds with an S at the end, .us. Want to record this outro? Well, you can't. I'm recording this outro. But if you'd like to record the outro for a future episode, see the details in the description below. Find SoundSpeeds on social media and online at www.soundspeeds.us. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more sound-related content. And what I mean is, if you really want to learn something, you should subscribe. I learn new things from Alan all the time. One time, I was listening to this episode and my mind was blown when we talked